So we'll formally get started. My name is Michael Goldberg. For those who we haven't met, I'm the executive director of our Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship at Case Western Reserve University. I also am a professor in our business school. And it's so exciting to welcome our friend Amy Nelson from Venture for America here to our Veale Entrepreneurship Speaker Series. These sessions are all student moderated, and we're thrilled to have Megan Nellis, who will be our moderator today. Megan is an undergraduate engineering student who has been interning this summer as part of our remote entrepreneurship project program with Nautilus, which is a startup in Charleston. So I think it's her first voyage in the startup world. Had you done any startup stuff before, Megan?
I haven't, so this will be my first one. Yeah.
Woo. So Megan will moderate. I know for those who are watching on LinkedIn Live, it's great to have you here as well. Just put any questions that you might have that you'd like Megan to ask Amy in the comment box. And if you're on Zoom, also use the chat function, to put your LinkedIn profile, and I'll let Carrie share info on VFA here in Cleveland via the chat if she's keen to do that. But just let Megan know whatever questions. We want to keep this really informal and have it be as participatory as possible. So with that, I will turn it over to Megan, who's going to run the show.
Thank you. Yeah, so really excited to be here with Amy. My name is Megan Nellis, and I am a upcoming junior chemical engineer at Case. Professor Goldberg kind of gave the rest of the introduction. So if Amy would like to introduce herself and talk a little bit about her career journey to get us started.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, good morning or afternoon. This day has already gotten away from me, everyone. I'm Amy Nelson. I am the CEO of Venture for America, and we are a fellowship program for recent college graduates who want to launch their careers as entrepreneurs, work for a startup in an emerging tech ecosystem such as Cleveland, spend 2 years training, making friends, learning the ropes of the startup, and then hopefully someday launching their own. We have helped more than 1,200 young people become startup leaders over the last 9 years now. And though our alumni have gone on to launch well over 100 businesses, employ hundreds of individuals, have raised more than 100 million in venture capital. So we're really about minting new businesses in places that need it, such as Cleveland, my hometown of St. Louis, or Baltimore, Birmingham, Alabama, all across the country. My background is really, I grew up in St. Louis, and as Eileen mentioned, left to head to the West Coast for Claremont McKenna. Spent a number of years there working in international development, decided I wanted to do something with business for good, moved to New York, went to business school because that's how I thought you learned about business at the time, through a series of events, including reading about Venture for America in the New York Times, came to work at the organization about 7 years ago, leading fundraising, worked my way up and have been CEO now for 3 years. So that's a little bit about me.
Right, that's a very interesting career journey. So I guess I'd like to start off with, with everything happening with the pandemic, how has COVID sort of affected Venture for America, how you do placements, how you get funding, things like that?
Yeah, it's been quite the journey. So, we shut down in mid-March, like, all of you, and similar to being at a university, we had 2 in-person, what we call selection days, which are our final judging days for the fellowship. So you apply online, go through this rigorous process, do a video interview, and then you're invited to one of our cities. Sometimes it's Cleveland, sometimes it's New York, sometimes it's Baltimore, to go do this big in-person interview day. And you have group challenges, and we were going to do it in St. Louis on March 13th. March 11th, very clear that wasn't happening. So we had 48 hours to turn this long-standing live event into a virtual interview day. We did that successfully, and then we had one the next week. And once we got through that immediate crisis of just like, how do we run this program virtually, is when we started to dig in and really realize that there was going to be, a pretty long haul. And so that meant all sorts of fundraising forecasts. I got on the horn with every major donor to make sure that they were still in. But even so, we obviously revised our revenue projections down, worked really closely with our board to figure out some scenarios. Very proud that, we haven't had to lay anyone off or even, reduce salaries or anything. We've really been able to keep the organization whole and intact, and that our donors are staying with us. So the biggest challenges have really been around how do we make our programs work in a virtual environment. So every year, we recruit great students. We have more than 3,000 apply this year. It was our most selective year ever. We end up with 215 at our training camp, which launched on July 5th. And, this is a program that happens for 4 weeks every summer, typically in Detroit, and is where the magic of Venture for America starts, right? Our fellows are meeting each other. These are their future roommates, co-founders, best friends, spouses sometimes, and they're used to being in a dorm, day in, day out, like learning in the program, and this is where the bonds are formed. But we had to make that virtual this summer, and we just actually finished last Thursday, and I'm really proud to say that we found a number of different platforms that facilitated communication, that we were able to condense the program down to some really core hours, because we had folks on the East Coast and the West Coast, and that our fellows still felt just as connected to the VFA mission, just as bought in, and just as, excited and connected with one another. So that was a win. On the flip side, a big piece of our mission is, we recruit you, select you, onboard you, train you, and then you're placed with a startup company where you go live, work for 2 years in one of our cities. And the good news is, very few of our fellows have been laid off in this time, only about 2%, which is great. Obviously bucking the national trends, and says something about, the strength of their skill sets, the future proofness, but probably also something about their privilege, just to be clear. But new hiring has been extraordinarily difficult. So our fellows are full-time salaried employees of the startups where they work. The startups agree to pay them at least $38,000. They also pay a placement fee and some other things. And what we've seen nationally, according to Glassdoor and others, is that entry-level hiring in the tech sector is down about 68% year over year. Startup funding obviously down, particularly for that seed stage, which is where we tend to play. And so as a result, it's been very, very difficult to place our incoming class this year. In a typical year, we would have 95% of our fellows already placed, at this time, ready to start work. Right now, we're not quite at 50% yet. We have a lot of companies that are still hiring. We're seeing those matches happen. We're confident that we will get the class placed, but it's been much, much slower going, and I think pretty stressful for the graduating seniors this year.
Yes, thank you for that. I can imagine with the economy and everything going on right now that it has been much more stressful. I have a question in from the Zoom chat. So Igor, I think if you would like to ask that question, you can, if you can unmute yourself.
Sure, happy to ask. Hi, Amy. My name is Igor. I'm a master's student at Case and a Cleveland entrepreneur. So my question kind of has two parts, but they're related. First, what are the biggest skills you look for in fellows? And then to follow on to that, what skills are you noticing that are becoming increasingly important in today's day and age?
So, we are agnostic about a lot of things. We're industry agnostic, we're major agnostic. This year, a little more than half of our fellows had some sort of math, science, engineering type background. But, our fellows are really in every discipline. So it's not that we're looking for any one particular technical skill set. It's really about personal qualities. And so the first part of our application is designed to assess your skills, your experiences, your academics, to make sure that you're someone who has a demonstrated track record of working really hard in the places that you've been, contributing, going above and beyond, and that you're able to articulate the accomplishments that you've had in your, internships. And actually this year and last year, about half of our fellows had already started something before becoming a VFA fellow. That could be a nonprofit, that could be a club chapter, or oftentimes it was a for-profit startup. So through our assessment process, what we're really looking for are interpersonal qualities. The first and foremost is, what is your ability to contribute to a startup? Are you someone who has a bias for action, can get up a learning curve really quickly and start to add value? And you're comfortable with ambiguity and all of those things that we know startups have to offer, right? You don't need someone to tell you twice, because that's not how it goes in a startup. We're also looking for folks who have demonstrated grit and resilience, because in startups, you're going to fail a lot, and you have to have the ability to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, get back in the game. So how can you articulate that? we're looking for optimism. We think that entrepreneurs are people who think that the future can be better, which is why they're investing in building something. We don't think cynics really have a place in our community. And so that's an important thing to demonstrate. And then, beyond that, we're looking for character and disposition. We believe in high character builders. We have a credo that we live by that's about acting with integrity in all things, emphasis on value creation. And so much of our process is really designed to understand, who you are as a person, what your goals are, your hopes and dreams are, and how you've conducted yourself thus far in your academic and professional career.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Great.
Igor.
I actually have another question, sort of about your COVID topic and how you ran the workshops and the 4-week training program that you did, because I'm part of an organization on the exec board, and we've had some trouble keeping members really engaged and feeling connected. So how did you accomplish that remotely?
There was a few tactics. So we had about 215 individuals. We broke them down into groups of like 42, 43, 5 groups. Just like a block system in business school. And we call them credo houses. So we have 5 credo statements. Every house, just like in Harry Potter, if you're paying attention, had a statement. And then we made it a 4-week competition where if you won that weekly challenge, you got a certain amount of points. If you participated in XYZ activity, you got a certain amount of points. And what we have seen, and you all know this, is that group identity can form very quickly if you make things competitive. So that was one piece. And then within those credo houses, we broke down even further into groups of 9, which were goal setting groups that met actually starting 2 weeks before the training program. And everyone put together a list of SMART goals for the program, and then going in through their fellowship, met weekly to talk about progress toward goals. And we really created an environment where people could be safe and vulnerable with one another. And then within your credo house, you also every week got a new team of 5 or 6 people to work on a group challenge together. And because you were competing for house points and other prizes, people took those challenges really seriously. I actually thought that our product challenge and pitch challenge were the best that I've ever seen this summer, despite the fact that people were working remotely. We did arrange the different credo houses by time zone. So there were 2 different concurrent schedules that overlapped during core hours, but then otherwise you were sort of free to work on your own. We did add in more like optional programming than normal. So if people wanted to join in the evening, they could. And then we had a social platform called Remo, which is basically has like virtual tables where people can meet each other. We did a virtual talent show. We did, virtual happy hours like that were organized by fellows. So, was it the same? Of course not. Were those moments where you might naturally run into someone that you didn't know before? Probably not. But I think every fellow left with at least 4 or 5 people who they felt like they could call upon, and then a broad sense of who all the people were in the community. We're going to be continuing to use Remo actually through the fall. And then we have one of our fellow founded companies called Jam actually is matching people to do coffee chats as well in small groups. So small groups are, I think, are key at this point.
Thank you. Those are really great tips, I think. And I'll probably be taking some of those back to my organization as well. One last COVID question from me. Do you think that you will be getting more applicants maybe in the next year or so because of what has happened with people getting new jobs and things like that?
Yeah, it's hard to predict because we are not going to be able to go on campus this fall to recruit. That's actually become an increasingly small piece of our strategy. A lot of our recruitment channels are through partnerships with membership organizations like Thurgood Marshall College Fund or LEDA or others, Jopwell, in those online recruiting platforms like Handshake and Ripple Match, as well as through referrals. So referrals have consistently been a really strong source. So current fellows recommend their friends who they think will make great fellows. And generally speaking, they're good at identifying the right people. So we have been able to sort of disambiguate career services a tiny bit, but at the same time, I think career services, is in this virtual environment really hungry for opportunities that are going to be there as opportunities are starting to dry up at the entry level. So I have no idea what's going to happen with our recruitment numbers this year. We are just trying to do our best, as well as everyone is. And I think in a lot of ways, even if people apply to us, because people might be throwing spaghetti on the wall, given, their anxiety about just having any job, we need to do a great job of selecting the fellows like we always do. And then we need to do an extraordinary job of placing the last class to demonstrate that even in a tough financial environment and a pandemic, we can continue to make good on our promise that if you become a Venture for America Fellow, we will find you a high quality startup opportunity.
Great, thank you. So moving off the COVID topic a little bit, I know that you have previously done a blog post about what it's kind of like to be a female CEO. And I was wondering if you could just touch on your thoughts about that and sort of the challenges that you might have had getting to this position.
Yeah, so I don't think about my gender every day, but there are certainly moments where you recognize that maybe someone is treating you differently than they might if you weren't a woman. And so for me, I was in a position, because I'd been with the organization for a long time and I had a really close relationship working directly for our founder, Andrew Yang, to demonstrate over time that this was the job that I wanted. But at the same time, I wasn't naturally necessarily the person that he was going to think about to do this job. I came from fundraising. I'd never started a business myself. I didn't really have that for-profit background. And so when Andrew was starting to think about leaving, I very much had to raise my hand and say, this is a job that I would like. And he was actually surprised by that. I don't know if my gender necessarily played a role, but I think in some ways it might have, because of what the conceptions of what someone leading an entrepreneurship organization might look like. So that was a moment for me where I just had to have the confidence to say, like, yes, this is a path that I would like to pursue. And then beyond that, I did talk in that article, the fine people at Apple have changed this, but at the time when you typed in CEO, I wanted to announce this to my friend. The suggested emoji was a man in a suit. Now it will give you both gender options. But that was just one of those moments where you were like, man, these are our perceptions. And then other than that, I think sometimes it's really been about, for me, having the confidence that I belong in the room, particularly with some of our external partners or supporters who are very successful, generally men, who are 20, 30 years older than me, and learning that they're just people and that they're actually just as excited to learn from you and learn about you as you are them. But it definitely took me a few meetings with that type of human to get comfortable with that.
Great, thank you. I am personally not on the LinkedIn Live. I don't know if there have been any comments. I don't know if Professor Goldberg knows of any. I just wanted to make sure.
I haven't seen any yet. I just went over there, okay. And Elizabeth and Doug will check. We'll let you know as I come in for sure.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't leaving anyone out. So can you talk to us a little bit about sort of VFA's credo? Because I know you mentioned that a couple of times, and its general mission.
Yeah, so our mission is to mobilize the next generation of entrepreneurs and equip them with the skills and resources that they need to create jobs. So that basically means finding the folks who are the most entrepreneurial in the set, training them, giving them on-the-job experiences, the support resources, the financial resources when they want to start a business, to allow them to sort of get going. We want to be the good housekeeping seal of approval for a young entrepreneur. And, a lot of our alumni have gone on to programs like Y Combinator, 500 Startups, or Techstars, and we want to be a signal to those types of organizations that this, company is legitimate. These founders are high quality, and be a boost along the way for them. In terms of our credo, these are 5 statements that we all agree to as the Venture for America community. Anytime you sign an offer letter with us, that includes signing on to the credo. And there, we have posters in the office. We like to remind ourselves that these are the values that we live by. So the credo is: 1, my career is a choice that indicates my values. 2, there is no courage without risk. 3, value creation is how I measure achievement. 4, I will create opportunity for myself and others. And 5, I will act with integrity in all things. And to us, that sort of sums up the the mark that we want to make on the universe as builders and innovators and entrepreneurs.
Thank you. I think Professor Goldberg has a question as well, so you can ask.
Right. And for those on Zoom and on LinkedIn Live, please let Megan know when you want to jump in for questions. We want to make this as interactive possible, but I will jump in with a question. I wanted to ask Amy about, and it's been awesome, the impact that VFA has had here in Cleveland. I mean, I've gotten to know a number of the fellows. We had Gabby Warshay in conversation with her dad. Annie is one of our first sessions of this series, and I know Amy Young from Magnet. I've gotten to know a number of folks. Because you are placing fellows with startups, I mean, many startups fail. And I know we had a situation here in Cleveland where a couple of the fellows were placed at a high growth startup that all of a sudden we were all reading in the paper about that they were doing layoffs. And I know just sort of through the grapevine that caused challenges not only for employees, but for the fellows. So I'm sort of, given the fact that you're not placing fellows at Fortune 500 companies and placing them at startups and startups fail, I don't know if you can sort of share some of the challenges that go along with that, the types of companies that you place in, and maybe even any insights coming out of that situation, either the one here in Cleveland or others when fellows do go somewhere and all of a sudden they lose their position midterm because of a failure.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting question. And we have been fortunate that the vast majority of the startups that we've worked with have not gone under or had layoffs in the period that we've been working with them. So the fellowship is 2 years. Companies commit to hiring a fellow for that period of time and, paying them a salary, et cetera. And one of the things that we learned early on is while there are definitely fellows who want to be the first paid employee at a company, just them and the founders, and maybe they're in a garage, who knows, that those types of companies often don't have the traction that they need to really be able to commit to that 2 years. And sometimes for those first couple of employees, they really need someone who has several years of expertise as opposed to an entry-level person. So generally speaking, we have shifted to be more in the sort of seed stage through Series A. So our typical company that we partner with already has 10 to 30 employees, has raised somewhere between 250,000, maybe a couple $1 million. We do go earlier than that and we do go later than that. Although, after a certain stage, a lot of times companies have outgrown us because we really want our fellows to have access to leadership and, the opportunity to wear a few different hats. And if you're just going to sort of slot them in the customer success department as like the 10th employee, that might not be the best learning opportunity. So what we have adjusted for is to go a tiny bit later, make sure that there's traction. We look at the team, we try to understand what they're trying to build, but we don't take a perspective onto like the specific company. Although if we were a VC, we'd be doing like decently well, I would say, based on where we've placed fellows. And then what we have seen is when fellows do get laid off, particularly if there are multiple fellows working at a company, there have been challenges in terms of retaining those fellows in that specific ecosystem long term. And so if you're thinking about, retention in the market, how can we keep talent in Cleveland? Fellows or any young person needs to understand not just what their current job is, maybe not just what the job they would be qualified to do after that job is, but what's the long-term horizon? How do they build out an entire career in Cleveland? And who are the people that they can look to and say, yes, like I want my career to be like Michael Goldberg's, for example. And have we connected them to those mentors? Do they feel connected to the community through civic engagement or other types of small communities that aren't just their friends through BFA? We want them to be sticky, whether that's a faith practice or a volunteer organizing something. And then the other sort of side benefit to that, in that specific case, one of the fellows who was laid off ended up co-founding a business with someone else in the Cleveland ecosystem who he'd met through just through being involved in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And now, the Opportunity Exchange, Leo Pena, up and running and hiring a bunch of new people, including several VFA fellows into the city. So, one of the lessons, obviously, from a startup winding down can be, oh, I got this newfound free time. It's time for me to launch my own thing. That's not going to happen every time, but it's been cool to watch when it has.
Great, thank you.
Great. Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. I didn't know that about all the different companies that you chose to put fellows in. Sort of along the lines of what you just said, where, sometimes a fellow can, end up co-founding their own business. And you mentioned at the beginning about your career journey. You thought that going to business school was sort of how you learned about business. So I guess in your opinion, like how does VFA play into like learning how to do business, learning how to start your own startup? Because you mentioned, that VFA can really help you get, I think, more of like an understanding of business and startups. So in your experience, how, I guess, can VFA provide that for somebody? Or what's sort of the difference between, going into VFA or going to business school?
So, I have an MBA, but I do sometimes, and no knock on any business school, including Case Western's. But in my opinion, business school is very expensive. And for the vast majority of people, they're going to be taking out a significant amount of student debt in order to finance that education. Now, you may do a part-time MBA, you may have your employer paying for it, you may have family resources or some other way of paying, which changes the game a little bit. But if you're going to be taking on a lot of debt, in my opinion, that is going to constrain your choices. And if you want to be an entrepreneur, it might make it a lot more difficult to finance that business and take the risk, because your choices are going to be constrained by having to service your debt. And as a result, most business schools want to get you into a small number of jobs that are high paying, right? Consulting, finance, maybe brand management. And that makes sense. And so if you're excited to be in one of those careers, business school makes a ton of sense. If you want to be an entrepreneur, it might not necessarily. And if you sort of peel back the layers on some of the, the folks who've gone to Wharton or HBS and are very famous entrepreneurs, most of them come from family resources. So I just caution people who are ready to start a business about whether or not committing to an MBA is the right thing. But what an MBA will get you is a network. But generally speaking, it'll get you a network of people who are in finance, consulting, or brand management. And so if you want to be an entrepreneur, the network that you need is going to be people who have very specific expertise in terms of venture capital or go-to-market strategy, or, how to build and develop a product. And those people might not live in the business school. They might, but generally speaking, they're going to exist in entrepreneurial circles. And for your first team, you're going to need someone who has a business background, probably someone who has a product background, maybe someone who has an operations or finance background. And what Venture for America can do for you, because our fellows come from a number of different disciplines, because we work in 14 different cities where we have connections throughout the entrepreneurial ecosystem, is it can open doors. And so, when I think about a company like the Opportunity Exchange or like Gather or FloatMe that went through our accelerator last year in Cleveland, these are individuals who had maybe spent some time in Cleveland through their fellowship, who knew a lot of different people. And so Gather was able to find beta test businesses because they knew all the local startups. They were able to, find local mentors who ultimately helped them get into Y Combinator. And there's just value in these places that that tends to exist in less formal surroundings. And what Venture for America tries to do is get you a like-minded group of peers who you can grow alongside, as well as access to people who are further down the road from you, who you can learn from, and individuals who might want to invest in your business. And we're starting to see this come full circle, where one of our alums is an investor at a major venture capital firm that just led a round into one of our fellow founded businesses called Ogni. So we're seeing that virtuous cycle start to develop. Yeah, it takes a couple of decades to get it all the way there. But what we want is a targeted and really specialized type network for a future entrepreneur.
Yeah, thank you. I know Eileen has a question, so if you want to share with the group.
Thanks. Sorry, I'm here on my phone, and if I sent my message too many times, I apologize for bombarding the chat. I work with students in elementary, middle, and high school to help them get started in entrepreneurship. And it's particularly the high school students that we try to influence in getting their start in something. And I'm curious about, what is your advice if these young men and women see themselves down the road really hoping to become an entrepreneur? What's your advice to them when they're in high school?
I think, in high school, you've got a whole lot of life ahead of you. But for any entrepreneur, you need to be solving problems that are relevant for you. We always tell our fellows that you need to fall in love with the problem, not your specific solution to the problem. Because if you're so hung up on the solution, then you won't listen to your customers. And so their most ready customer base are probably going to be some combination of their peers, maybe their teachers, maybe the other families in their communities. So what are the problems that you're facing day in, day out? I think COVID is obviously creating a new and unique set of challenges as well. And there's a lot of white space to solve those problems. And I think that this sort of like Gen Z group brings an entirely new perspective as total digital natives who don't necessarily cut up the world the same way that, millennials or the Gen Xers do, and definitely not the boomers. And so focusing on problems that are personal, that are in your community, and that you can just sort of test your, your results on, and get that feedback from your customer base.
Thanks.
So I think Elizabeth also has a question, if you want to ask that.
Yeah, hi, I'm Elizabeth Chilrad. I'm a rising junior at Case Western studying marketing and an intern with the Veale Institute this summer, and I will be in the fall as well. My question was, so according to your bio on the VFA website, one of your personal focuses is to lower barriers to entrepreneurship for everyone. So can you just discuss your view on how to make entrepreneurship more accessible? Obviously you don't have all the answers. It's a very complicated question that ties in with wealth and education and et cetera. But I just wanted your perspective on that.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons that I talk so much about student debt, and because I think there's a lot of data that suggests that it's the number one barrier to young people starting businesses. And so to the extent that anyone can avoid taking on student debt through whatever the sort of means are that's necessary, I highly, highly encourage that. And for Venture for America, what it has meant is intentionally identifying individuals from all sorts of diverse backgrounds and being very proactive in our recruitment practices through partnerships that target, low to moderate income students from racially diverse backgrounds that have been historically underrepresented and excluded in entrepreneurship. And so how are we building out the funnel? And then we're looking at our selection processes to make sure that they are equitable, seeing, what are the pass rates through the selection process? Are there biases? How can we root them out? And over the years, we've refined that because we've found that certain questions bias different groups, or that, the way that we were interacting as judges or training our judges had an effect on their perceptions of candidates, particularly if those candidates weren't of the same racial or gender groups as they were. So a big piece of it is just, who are we welcoming into our community? And then it's around, what is the access that our community can bring? And are we making sure that our fellows are having a good experience regardless of their background? And that they have the opportunity to learn from mentors and bosses who share their background in many cases. And then we also try to make it easy to start a business however we can. So for example, we used to do a crowdfunding competition every year, and it was fun. But what we found was it often, like all crowdfunding competitions, favored people who already had a network, who had friends and family who could support them. And then Venture for America was one-upping that by giving the person who raised the most money additional money. And that didn't make sense for us. And so we switched to a process called the Validation Challenge, which we host every quarter, and it's very low lift for teams. It's a 2-week rapid hypothesis testing where you test your riskiest hypothesis. You get feedback from customers or whoever it is that you need feedback from, and then you can choose to move forward with the business or not. And you can participate in that program as many times as you would like before becoming full-time on your business. Similarly, the VFA Accelerator is a full-time residential opportunity where we don't take equity, but we do actually provide a housing stipend. And so it's a big risk to leave your job and to go full-time on a company. I actually always encourage people to learn on someone else's dime for as long as they can. One of my favorite entrepreneurial stories is, Sarah Blakely of Spanx, who sold fax machines for her day job and didn't quit that day job until she was literally like Spanx was about to be one of Oprah's favorite things. And so we always encourage people, like, have a job, be on the payroll, work on that side hustle in your own time, and don't pull the trigger to go full-time on that company until you've got that runway and you can, continue to put money back into the business. I'm not a huge proponent of venture capital. Obviously, it's very useful in many circumstances, but the extent to which, folks can extend their own horizon, the better. And I think that will help, entrepreneurship become more accessible over time. That might mean waiting another 10 years to launch your business, but if it was a good idea now, it'll probably be a good idea in 10 years, depending on what it is. And so in our accelerator, we provide a housing stipend, so you don't have to worry about paying rent, about feeding yourself. You can just focus on your business for 4 months and then, hopefully be in a place where you can either raise some capital or, earn from your customers. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much.
And of course, I'm loving seeing all of the new funds that are dedicated to historically, underrepresented founders. I think we need everyone in the investment community, the entrepreneurship community, to recognize just the deep inequities that exist, to spend time not just mentoring, Brian Brackeen, the founder of Lightship Capital, says that Black founders are over mentored and underinvested. So yes, do the mentoring thing, but also write that check. And we're trying to do our part.
Great, thank you.
Great. Andrew, I am not sure if, I know you had a question. It might have been touched on, but if you'd like to ask it.
So your discussion about debt and student debt sort of emphasizes the challenge of being privileged and not privileged. And have you ever considered helping fellows or prospective fellows with their student debt?
So we have done some student debt relief. The challenge with that, unfortunately, is the way that the laws have changed over the past few years, is if we write a check even directly to the loan provider, that income becomes taxable to the fellows according to our tax attorneys. So we have to 1099 them for that. And as a result, we have tried to find other mechanisms of financial support, whether that's assistance with reimbursement of business needs, which is less likely to be taxable. But it's something that we're part of a group of other entrepreneurship support organizations called the Start Us Up Coalition that's advocating for policy change. And one of the changes that we want to see is student debt relief for entrepreneurs, just like we have for public service right now.
Great. I think Rika also had a question to ask.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for the webinar. It's very fascinating to hear about how it evolved and what your program goals are. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on cultivating the entrepreneurial mindset in everyone, as opposed to kind of enabling people who already kind of want to start their own business through the VFA experience. Do you find that well-established organizations and companies recognize the value of the entrepreneurial mindset and entrepreneurship per se?
Oh, I love this question. I think that there's a lot of lip service paid to entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial mindsets, but I don't necessarily see it manifesting in the ways that I would like it to manifest. And in particular, I think our education system, like our K-12 system and probably our collegiate system as well, does a lot to just sap the entrepreneurial potential from our young people. You know, forcing someone to sit still for 8 hours a day doesn't make sense if that person is a child. Forcing them to do rote learning and to regurgitate information on a test because we have a common core set of standards probably doesn't do a lot to further one's entrepreneurial mindset. And at Venture for America, what we do in our training program is really a lot of challenge-based learning. It's open-ended prompts to solve a problem. Here's a way that you can think about approaching that problem through, you know, human-centered design, or, you know, a tactical approach to building out a customer base. And here are the different revenue models that you can choose from. But you need to figure these things out on your own. You need to learn as you're going. And as far as I can tell, very little in our education system does anything to reward that type of thinking. So if I was going to point fingers, it would probably be at a lot of K-12 to begin with. And so I think we've taken, you know, a country that is naturally quite entrepreneurial and conformed it into this really bizarre system, personally. And then, you know, obviously there are schools that do different things, and we think that's great. And then the universities tend to, like, you know, Michael, you teach, you understand, like, how many times do you hear, you know, someone raising their hand and saying, is this going to be on the test? And that's just like not how life works. You know, do you only take notes if it's going to be on the test? Like, every day is a test. And if you're an entrepreneur, it's impossible to predict what's going to be on the test. And so what you need is you need to learn, how to get information, how to build a network of people who can help you when you're facing a challenge. And you need to learn how to not be married to your own ideas. And I think that that's not something that a lot of our other systems are rewarding. And then, you know, fortunately, I haven't spent a lot of time in the corporate world. Carrie has. Maybe she can handle this better. But what I see in my friends and colleagues, even my spouse, who are in the corporate world, is that there's a pretty clearly defined path. And you know what you need to do to get an A on the test. And our corporate structures have, you know, sort of just reinvented these same processes that our elementary schools and high schools and universities did, because kids are used to getting that dopamine hit when they get the A. And I always tell our fellows that, like, from now on, there's no syllabus in life. But a lot of corporates want to just recreate that structure of, here's your peer group, here's how you get to the next level, here's how you get an A. And I personally don't think that is realistic.
Thank you. That was a really insightful answer. Thank you. I have a question from LinkedIn Live, and I think, you know, depending on how long it is, might be our last question before sort of closing out. But it from Farbod Rohani, I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. He asked, we just moved from Cleveland to the Valley to expand our company and our network. However, unfortunately, COVID is a bit of an obstacle in our networking. I was wondering if you have any advice for us to expedite this process.
Yeah, I hear that. I haven't met a lot of new people myself, other than, of course, Megan, since COVID has hit. And I think it's been a time to really call upon any and all goodwill that you've generated in the past. And so the best kind of introduction is always a warm introduction. If you haven't read Chris Fralick's first round review articles about how to be an insanely good networker, how to write a self-contained forwardable email, do that right this very minute. It's the best networking advice on the planet. But what you need to do, if you can't go out and meet people organically, is look at the people that you already know, reach out to them, tell them what you're up to, get a sense of who is in their network. Fellows do this for me all the time. They'll be like, I scraped your LinkedIn. I want these 12 connections. What do you think? And then I'll say, okay, that one doesn't make sense. That one doesn't make sense, but these 3 do. And like, let me think about these other ones. Write me a self-contained forwardable email, which tells that person how you know me, why you think they're interesting, and what you're up to, and what you want to get out of that conversation. And then I'm going to send it to them, ask for their permission to connect back to you, and then put the 2 of you together. But that means that you need to do the work to understand what you want to get from that relationship. It can't just be, I want to pick your brain. Don't ever pick anyone's brain. One, that's really violent. And two, it's non-specific. You need to understand what is the information or experience that that person has that can somehow be useful to you. And I think in this moment, people really appreciate when someone has been thoughtful about why they want to connect. And so if someone reaches out to me and says, I read this article that you wrote, or I know so-and-so, and I have this very specific problem that I think you can be insightful on, much more helpful than if someone sends me something that's like several degrees removed from my area of expertise. And I have no, common touch point with that person. That can be hard if your network is small, but I think you can find ways to get creative. You can go back to elementary school if you want to. Like think about all the different facets of your community.
That was really great. So just one last question, kind of closing out. And for Robert, who asked what the name of those networking articles are, perhaps we can maybe like link them or something.
I think I put it in. I found at least one on Forbes by Chris, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
I put it in the chat.
In the first round review, if you don't read it, to me, it's the Startup Bible. Great advice for startup leaders, managers, and strong recommend. But How to Be Insanely Well Connected is his premier article in the first round review.
Awesome. So if you had to give, I guess, like the biggest advice to someone who might not even be like a new entrepreneur, just someone with an idea that they want to, see where it goes, what would your advice be to them in getting us like started with that?
Yeah. So obviously startups come with a high degree of risk, as we've talked about. And I think that you need to get really real about what your assumptions are. And so a lot of us don't even realize that we're assuming things because it's an assumption and because we have a certain frame of reference on the world. And so, whether it's going to someone who is a trusted friend or advisor, but someone who will give you the real deal, and you need to like identify and unpack all the assumptions that go into your business. Identify which ones are creating some sort of risk for you. That could be market risk, that could be product risk, that could be supply chain risk. There's a million different kinds of risk that it could be, but identify those risks and find ways to mitigate them or to test them before you jump right into the market. And then from there, always be learning from your customers. Like always, always, always do not get married to the way that you think the problem needs to be solved. You need to listen to the customer and what they're telling you. But you also need to know, and this is hard, when to stop listening, because customers will tell you like, oh yeah, I want that feature. Oh yeah, this is important. You can't do every single thing. So you need to figure out what are the critical features or the critical functions, critical problems to solve for that customer, and what's going to make it good enough that it's going to be competitive before you can roll out the platinum version of whatever the product is.
Great, thank you. Just a call for any last questions, or we might be, I don't know, Professor Goldberg?
Yeah, why don't we, I'll do, I will wrap it up just to be, consider everybody's time. Megan, thank you for moderating. You did a great job. That was awesome. It was funny, among Megan's many accomplishments when we were talking before, I was like, Megan, you ever moderated a session? She's like, no. I was like, have at it. Here you go. And you did a great job. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Amy and Carrie, thank you both for your partnership with VFA. We did share a link about how to apply.
Our application also opened today. So Robert, I feel your pain. Today is also the first day that you can apply to Venture for America. It'll be open until January, but get those applications in sooner than later because I do think it's going to be a very, very competitive year. Last year was our most competitive year ever, and I think it's going to be even more so this year if I was guessing.
Awesome. And for those who are in Northeast Ohio, Carrie Murphy, who introduced herself in the beginning, is based here, and they've got a great program. And actually, we had a conversation recently with Carrie and her team about things that we can do together as part of our Veale Institute. And working with some of the fellows that are looking to do more community-based work. So we're excited about the partnership with VFA. I know Adrian, one of our students from last year, is joining this group as a new fellow. So we love the work that you guys
He's
are doing.
awesome. So excited to have him. Yeah.
Got to keep the pipeline going.
And I already told Megan that I expect her application next year. Elizabeth, same to you if you're also a rising junior, and the rest of you on the call. And Carrie or I and the team, we're always here to answer your questions if you have them. And if you're in a position to hire, also reach out to us, because it is so tough out there, and we need high quality placements for our